coming up on this Friday edition of Newsline at noon. U.S. President Barack Obama and House Republicans failed to forge a deal to avoid a national default, but will continue negotiating a Republican offer to increase the debt limit for a few weeks. Canadian author Alice Munro is named the winner of this year's Nobel Literature Prize. Munro is a renowned short story writer whose work has long been likened to Chekhov's. Plus, as the government continues its crackdown on corruption in the private sector, prosecutors raid the offices of Hyosung Group and the home of the group's chairman for alleged tax evasion. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Chehyusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. We start with the latest on the U.S. fiscal fight. The White House says no decision has been made on raising the U.S. debt ceiling. The Republicans had offered a short-term increase in the debt limit to ward off a potentially disastrous default. Despite no deal being reached yet, hopes are growing the Republican offer of a short-term fix could jumpstart fiscal talks. Our Kim Young-gil has more.
President Obama and House Republican leaders emerged empty-handed from a meeting Thursday on how to deal with the government shutdown and extending the U.S. debt ceiling. 20 Republicans, including House Speaker John Boehner, were at the White House to propose a 6-week increase in the nation's $16.7 trillion debt ceiling as a way to stave off the country's first-ever default. The proposal outlined by Boehner would maintain a partial government shutdown while Republicans and Democrats negotiate broader budget and spending issues. Obama had demanded the Republicans both reopen the government and raise the government's debt limit at least for a short period of time as a precondition to sitting down at the bargaining table. Republicans seem to be steering clear of the restrictions on Obama's healthcare reforms and spending that prompted the crisis in the first place. Instead, both sides are negotiating on how far to extend the debt limit and how much funding they would provide the government when it reopens. After the meeting, the White House said the president looks forward to making continued progress with members on both sides of the aisle, but added the Republicans have yet to propose a specific bill. The president wants to quickly end the government shutdown that began on October 1st. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
World Bank President Yong Kim has warned emerging markets to be prepared for the U.S. Federal Reserve's tapering of massive bond-buying stimulus program. During an IMF World Bank meeting in Washington Thursday, Kim said developing economies in particular should pursue fiscal reforms to prepare for an expected interest rate hike following the potential rollback. Kim said now is the time to move and gave a 2 to 3 month window before the Fed starts scaling back its $85 billion monthly bond purchases. Urging Washington to gradually taper its stimulus program, the World Bank chief also raised concerns about the fallout from a possible default in the U.S.
President Park Geunhye is now in the Indonesian capital of Jakarta, where she will continue her so-called sales diplomacy with Indonesia during her state visit. She is scheduled to meet with her Indonesian counterpart on Saturday. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Jun-ju filed this report from Jakarta.
Sales diplomacy will be the key focus of President Park's 3-day stay in Jakarta, Indonesia. The presidential office of Cheongwade says the president's choice of Indonesia as the second Southeast Asian country of her overseas trip reflects her economic and strategic emphasis on the ASEAN region, which has emerged as a so-called post-BRICS bloc. Indonesia is the largest economy among ASEAN member countries. On Friday, President Park is expected to meet with Korean and Indonesian business leaders at a business forum and discuss ways to expand cooperation in the economic sector. The Korean president will also call for Indonesian government support for Korean companies seeking to participate in the country's major infrastructure projects and work towards solving the difficulties facing Korean firms operating here in Indonesia. Before heading to Indonesia on Thursday in Brunei, President Park met with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who attended the East Asia Summit on behalf of President Barack Obama, and reaffirmed their strong alliance and firm stance on North Korea.
We are very grateful for the significant role that you are currently playing on the global stage, and particularly our cooperation with respect to North Korea.
President Park also met with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, where the two leaders are known to have discussed pending economic issues between the two countries, including the second stage Korea-China FTA negotiations, which is set to take place starting November. Chekhov did not provide any further details on the talks with Kerry and Li, which observers say comes in consideration of the evident tension between the U.S. and China over Washington's recent support for Tokyo's right to collective self-defense. Ju, Arirang News, Jakarta.
The United States and China have reaffirmed their commitment to see North Korea completely abolish its nuclear weapons program. The U.S. State Department says Chinese Premier Li Keqiang and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, meeting on the sidelines of a regional summit in Brunei, also talked about boosting cooperation on the matter and ways to pressure the North to return to negotiations. The two sides then agreed negotiation itself is not the ultimate goal, but a negotiation with a true intent to end the nuclear program and verify the termination. Pyongyang insists on promptly resuming international talks on its nuclear program without preconditions. But Washington and its allies say North Korea should first take some concrete action towards denuclearization before any dialogue can occur.
North Korea has threatened to reveal some of the past conversations its leadership has had with visiting South Korean lawmakers and envoys. Criticizing the controversy over the transcript of the 2007 Inter-Korean Summit here in the South, Pyongyang's committee overseeing inter-Korean affairs said it could disclose details of conversations between North Korean officials and visiting South Korean figures during which they try to please the North. Some of the South's ruling party lawmakers claim former Liberal President Roh Moo-hyun had conceded to the North during the 2007 summit. Analysts say this is the North's way of pressuring President Park Geun-hye, as she had also visited Pyongyang and met then North Korean leader Kim Jong-il in 2002 as a special envoy. The mother of Kenneth Bae, a Korean-American who has been detained in North Korea for 11 months, has arrived in Pyongyang to see her son. Bae's sister Terry Chung said Bae was granted permission to receive a visit from his mother, Bae Myung-hee, and the two are due to meet Friday morning. Bae, a Christian missionary and tour operator, was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor by the North Korean regime in May for allegedly plotting sedition. Bae's mother, who is expected to stay in Pyongyang for about 5 days, said she wants to encourage her son, who has become ill after his long imprisonment.
More Korean conglomerates are facing government probes for allegedly evading taxes, creating slush funds and conducting illegal intra-group transactions. Our Yulian has the latest developments.
Prosecutors on Friday raided the headquarters of the country's 26th largest conglomerate, Hyosung Group, and the home of the conglomerate's chairman, Cho Seok-bae, to seize accounting records. Investigation on the conglomerate began earlier this month after the National Tax Service accused Chairman Cho and two of its aides of plotting tax evasions. The country's tax agency also accused the group of manipulating its accounting books in the past 10 years to cover up the losses occurred in its overseas businesses in the wake of the 1997 Asian financial crisis. In a separate probe, financial regulators are also studying accounting books of the embattled Dongyang Group on suspicion that it illegally arranged intragroup deals to hide financial difficulties of some of its affiliates. An affiliate of Dongyang Group, Dongyang Financial Services, last month filed a revised report on its financial records as it had dropped intragroup deals worth 180 billion won, or roughly $170 million in its previous report. The revised report was filed when the group sought court receivership for its affiliates. The recent probes into the country's major conglomerates are part of the Park Geun-hye's administration's campaign to correct their unfair market practices prevalent in the past. Yuri-an, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Choi, Yoo-sun, and Mark Broome every weekday at lunchtime. NEWSLINE at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
Canadian author Alice Munro has won the Nobel Prize in Literature for 2013. Munro, who has been praised as one of the greatest contemporary writers of fiction and a master of the short story, is the first Canadian and only the 13th woman to win the Literature Award. Kim Ji-yeon has more.
Canadian writer Alice Munro was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature on Thursday, with the Swedish Academy in their announcement calling her the master of the contemporary short story. Admirers have praised Munro's stories for the richness of plot and depth of detail. Her stories mostly deal with struggles, loves, and tragedies of women living in small-town Canada.
I didn't know about it till quite recently. And then, of course, it just seemed one of those pipe dreams that it might happen, but it probably wouldn't. But I'm very surprised.
The short story, a style more popular in the 19th and early 20th century, has been the backbone of Munro's work. And the characters in her stories are mainly girls and women leading unexceptional lives who struggle with tribulations including sexual abuse, failing marriages, repressed love, and the troubles of aging. The 82-year-old Munro has published several short story collections, including Lives of Girls and Women in 1971, Runaway in 2004, and Too Much Happiness in 2009.
And I would really hope that this would make people see the short story as an important art, not just something that you played around with until you got a novel written.
Munro is the first Canadian writer and only the 13th woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Previous writers include Toni Morrison and Ernest Hemingway. Last year's recipient was the Chinese novelist Mo Yan. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The Pakistani teenager who was shot in the head by the Taliban last year for campaigning for education for girls has won the European Union's annual Human Rights Award. The Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought has been given by the European Parliament every year since 1988. Malala Yousafzai received the honors on Thursday. The 16-year-old was shot last October in northern Pakistan on a bus on her way home from school, but was taken to Britain, where she now lives, for emergency treatment. She started her campaign by blogging about how the Taliban was preventing girls from going to school, and that brought both attention and death threats from the militant Islamist group. The teenager is also a favorite to win the Nobel Peace Prize this year and is the youngest person to be nominated for the prize. Major world powers, including the United States and Britain, along with the United Nations, have decried the brief abduction of the Libyan Prime Minister and reiterated their support for the country's transition to democracy. Ali Zidan was released Thursday after being taken by force from a hotel in Tripoli and held for several hours by a group of former rebels. The U.S. government called the kidnapping an act of thuggery, while UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon urged all Libyans to work to build a strong and stable country. The group that claims responsibility, the Operations Room of Libya's revolutionaries, said they seized the prime minister because of his government's role in the U.S. capture of a top al-Qaeda suspect in Tripoli.
Korea's ties with Japan are likely to be stretched to the limit again next week as a group of Japanese politicians are reportedly planning to pay their respects to Japan's war dead at the Yasukuni War Shrine. Japan's Asahi Shimbun reported Thursday that two members of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's cabinet, Yoshitaka Shindo and Keiji Furuya, have indicated that they will visit the shrine during the country's fall festival, which starts next week. The cabinet members were among a group of Japanese lawmakers who went to the shrine on August 15th, the anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. The Yasukuni Shrine honors Japan's war dead, including several Class A war criminals. Now, in the run-up to and during World War II, Japan ran a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit that carried out gruesome and lethal experiments on human subjects. To raise awareness of the atrocities, an exhibition on the notorious Unit 731 has opened in Seoul. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Guinea pigs. That's what Unit 731 called its test subjects. Japanese colonial troops established a human testing lab in the 1930s in Manchuria, China. It will carry out the most horrendous biological and chemical research the world has ever seen, conducting 30 different types of inhumane and gruesome living body tests. With the cooperation of the Chinese government, the tools that were used during the testing are on display for the first time in Korea at the Independence Hall of Korea. This box was used to incubate viruses, bacteria, and microorganisms for use on the subjects. These tools were used to cut and hang live organs. These are all proof of Japan's past wartime wrongdoings. The exact number of people who died horrible deaths at the hands of Unit 731 is not known, but it's thought to be around 1,500. Most of the victims were Chinese. 6 Koreans were estimated to have died, but it could have been a lot more.
In the 1930s, many Korean independence fighters switched nationalities to Chinese, so there could have been more victims of Korean descent than the estimates show.
In 2002, Japan acknowledged the gruesome acts carried out by the Unit 731, but the Chinese victims say Tokyo showed no sign of genuine remorse.
The Japanese government needs to restore the lives and dignity of the victims and need to compensate the victims' families.
This issue, along with Tokyo's reluctance to offer a full and frank apology for its military use of sex slaves during the war, continued to stir up tensions in Northeast Asia. Organizers of the exhibition say it shows Tokyo needs to admit to and make amends for its wartime atrocities. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Global shipments of PCs have slumped to a 5-year low as they continue to suffer from the growing popularity of tablets and smartphones. Research firm Gartner says shipments totaled just over 80 million units in the second quarter of this year, down roughly 8.5% from a year ago. PC sales appear to be in terminal decline, having fallen for 6 straight quarters now. Gartner adds that falling tablet and smartphone prices have further impacted the sales of PCs in emerging markets. Seoul will become the venue of the biggest international gathering on issues related to the internet next week. Our Hwang Sung-hee gives us a preview of what will be discussed at the Seoul Conference on Cyberspace 2013.
Around 1,000 IT experts from more than 90 countries will gather in Seoul next week to discuss ways to tackle cybercrime. Under the theme of global prosperity through an open and secure cyberspace, the Seoul Conference on Cyberspace 2013 will focus on 6 main issues: economic growth and development, socio-cultural benefits, cybersecurity, international security, cybercrime, and developing nations' capacity building. The organizing committee for the upcoming gathering says this year's meeting will differ from previous meetings as it's the first time that developing nations have been invited. ways to assist developing nations in building a secure internet economy, as well as offering digital support, will be discussed. The participants will also hold in-depth talks on bolstering international cooperation in dealing with cyber terrorism that threatens national security, as cross-border disputes triggered by cyber attacks have become commonplace. The annual conference is the third of its kind, with the previous meetings held in London and Budapest. The British government founded the International Forum in 2011 in an effort to seek common ground across countries on major issues related to cyberspace, such as cybercrime and the social benefits of the Internet. On the last day of the meeting, the participants will adopt a so-called Seoul Principle, which will serve as a guideline for effectively dealing with the darker side of cyberspace. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Two of Seoul's most happening districts, Hongdae and Gangnam, will be alive with music for the next couple of days. This year's Seoul International Music Fair is underway, and our Park Ji-won reports that it promises to be even bigger and better than last year's.
Musicians and music professionals from the world over, ranging from the renowned to the up-and-coming, have gathered in Korea for the opening of this year's Seoul International Music Fair, or MUCON 2013. Korea's biggest annual pop music fair got started this year with an opening performance on Thursday evening. The event has drawn in hundreds of global music industry insiders, including some of the biggest names. Four-time Grammy Award-winning jazz guitarist Larry Carlton is one of the participants. He will give a masterclass for young Korean musicians and share his advice.
Always play from your heart, and then the listener can get a true perspective on your music. In other words, put your ego aside, don't try to show off, don't try to do anything except make the music. But you have to prepare so that you can make your music.
Seasoned music producers and industry leaders with decades of experience have joined discussion sessions and lectures, while they also search for new sounds and voices as showcases.
I'm going to choose one band to record, and they're going to come to California, and we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of good music here, not just in K-pop, but in other genres as well, I've heard already.
The event also offers opportunities for artists and entertainment companies from more than 20 countries to network.
Compared to last year, MUCON has grown in the number of participating musicians and buyers. Some 400 key music industry insiders from the U.S., Japan, and other countries are expected to visit the event this year.
54 music bands from Korea and other countries like Singapore and Brazil will hold showcases through Friday at several locations around the Hongdae and Gangnam areas of Seoul. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Well, that sure looks like a lot of fun there. A nice way to spend the weekend, perhaps. And now it's time to get a check on the weather with our Lee Ji-yeon, who's standing by at the Weather Center. Good afternoon to you, Ji-yeon.
Hello there, guys. Now, it's the middle of autumn, but doesn't it seem like there are more mosquitoes around these days?
You're right. It really seems like mosquitoes are everywhere these days. Is that because we had such a long and scorching hot summer this year?
Well, that's correct. And I thought it was because of the effects of global warming. And while that's a factor, it also sounds like it's rather common to see mosquitoes in the fall. But let's hope those mosquitoes don't stick around for too long. But even if there are mosquitoes out there, it's hard not to take advantage of this pleasant autumn weather. And speaking of pleasant weather, it's sunnier right now in Seoul and metro area compared to this morning, but it feels quite chilly and windy. And as we can see, a thin white layer of clouds are hanging around the nation, so giving us some nice autumn sun across the nation. Now tomorrow, plenty of sun will continue to go around, but the morning lows will dip down into the low teens in most regions, but the afternoon highs should be warmer than today. And the outlook for Sunday is looking great as well, so if you're planning to take a short trip over the weekend, you'll have perfect weather for your getaway, and I'm very jealous. With that, it's time to take a look at the readings for today. So we'll get up up to 21 degrees Celsius, that's 70 degrees in Fahrenheit, and that's about 5 degrees lower compared to yesterday. And the high in Daegu and Gwangju will top out at 23 and 25, and Busan will have summery weather with a high of 27. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju, Daejeon, and Dokdo will see highs in the low to mid-20s, while Mount Kumgang stays in the cooler side. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all for me this week. Have a wonderful weekend, and back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Thank you very much, Jiyeon. Have a wonderful weekend. And that's pretty much all for now. But as I keep reminding you, you can always catch up with what's been happening on our website, and that can be found at arirang.co.kr/news.
We'll be back next Monday, but do stay with Arirang TV for more on the day's headlines.